A single piece of paper thicker than a normal ticket and embossed with a golden eagle held the power to shatter a life. But Dr. Imani Vance didn't know that yet. Standing in the bustling priority boarding line at JFK, all she felt was the quiet thrill of heading to Geneva. She was a respected neurologist, a woman who had built her world on precision and intellect. She believed in cause and effect, in actions and consequences. She never imagined that a simple flight, a dismissive glance from a stranger, would trigger a chain of events so devastating and yet so poetic it would redefine her understanding of karma itself. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 8 was a familiar symphony of chaos and anticipation. The hurried footsteps of late passengers, the distant roar of jet engines, the multilingual announcements echoing from the ceiling. It was the soundtrack of departure. Dr. Imani Vance stood calmly amidst it all, a small oasis of composure. At 28, she carried an air of quiet confidence that had been hard-earned. Dressed in a tailored navy blue blazer, comfortable yet elegant trousers, and practical flats, she looked every bit the professional she was. She was on her way to an international neurology conference in Geneva, where she was scheduled to present her groundbreaking research on degenerative nerve disorders. Her carry-on, a sleek leather satchel, held her laptop and presentation notes. In her hand, she clutched her passport and a unique boarding pass, a stiff cream-colored cardstock folder issued by Global American Airlines. It felt heavy, substantial, a relic from a different era of air travel. The priority boarding call for Flight 112 to Geneva echoed through the lounge. Imani joined the short queue for first-class passengers. The gate agent at the podium was a woman in her late 40s, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe tight bun. Her name tag read Caroline Foster. Her movements were sharp, efficient, but her eyes held a weary, almost resentful flicker as she processed the passengers. She offered a plastic smile to the businessman in front of Imani, his silver hair and expensive watch, seemingly granting him an unspoken pass. Then it was Imani's turn. She stepped forward and placed her passport and the cardstock folder on the scanner. "Good morning," Imani said, with a polite, genuine smile. Caroline didn't return it. Her eyes swept over Imani, a quick, dismissive appraisal from head to toe. It was a look Imani knew well, the silent questioning, the snap judgment that suggested she was in the wrong place. Caroline's gaze then fell to the thick, unusual ticket. She picked it up as if it were a strange artifact. "This isn't a boarding pass," she stated flatly, her tone dripping with condescension. "The app, miss. We use the app for boarding passes, or a printout from the kiosk." "I know," Imani replied, her smile tightening slightly. "That's the permanent pass. You just need to scan the barcode inside." She opened the folder to reveal the pass itself. It was a handsome document with her name photograph and a scannable code. Beneath it in elegant script were the words, "Unlimited, first-class, system-wide lifetime." Caroline's lips thinned into a razor line. She let out a short, incredulous puff of air, and then with theatrical slowness rolled her eyes. It wasn't a subtle motion. It was a deliberate, patronizing gesture, meant to be seen a clear communication of disbelief and annoyance. She was signaling to Imani and to anyone who might be watching that this young black woman was trying to pull a fast one. Miss Caroline said, her voice now laced with a saccharine false patience. "I've been working for this airline for 22 years. I think I know what our boarding passes look like. This is not it. You'll need to step aside and get a valid ticket from the customer service desk." Imani felt a familiar heat rise in her chest. It was the flush of indignation, the anger that came from being so casually dismissed, so publicly questioned. She had dealt with this her whole life, but it never got easier. She took a slow, calming breath, determined not to let this woman unravel the composure she relied on as a surgeon. With all due respect, Imani said, her voice steady and clear. "That is my valid ticket. It's a non-revenue, unlimited pass. If you scan it, you'll see it's linked directly to my reservation for seat 2A. The line behind them was growing. People were starting to stare. An older white woman peered around Imani, sighing impatiently. A man in a suit checked his Rolex. The public stage had been set, and Caroline was the director. Right. An unlimited pass. Caroline scoffed, leaning into the microphone on the podium as if to broadcast the absurdity of the claim. "Everyone, we have a slight delay. Someone has a creative boarding pass we need to verify." Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at Imani's skin. Caroline's words were designed to paint her as a fraud, a silly girl with a fantasy ticket. But beneath Imani's anger, a core of steel solidified. Her father had taught her to stand her ground, to never let anyone make her feel small. And this pass, this very document Caroline was mocking, was her father's legacy. "I understand. It's unusual," Imani said, refusing to back down. "But it is valid. Could you please just scan it? Or if you're unable to do that, perhaps you could call a supervisor. I'd rather not hold up the line." Caroline's eyes narrowed into slits. The challenge to her authority was the final straw. "Oh, I'll be calling a supervisor, don't you worry about that, to report a fraudulent travel document." She picked up the phone, her back ramrod straight, a smug little smile playing on her lips. She had won, she thought. She had put the girl in her place. But as she dialed, she had no idea that she wasn't just making a phone call. She was setting a time bomb on her own life, and the clock had just started ticking. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Caroline spoke into the phone in a low, conspiratorial tone, loud enough for Imani and those nearby to hear key damaging phrases. "Yes, a young woman. Claiming it's a lifetime pass. No, it looks like something printed at home. First class, of course." Each word was a carefully placed stone in the wall of suspicion she was building around Imani. The line of first-class passengers was rerouted to the adjacent scanner, handled by another agent, who shot apologetic glances toward Imani. But the damage was done. The scene had drawn an audience. Passengers from the main boarding group craned their necks, their faces a mixture of curiosity, annoyance, and judgment. Imani stood alone, isolated in a bubble of public scrutiny. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, her professionalism, her very presence being dissected by strangers. She could feel their thoughts, their preconceived notions, swirling in the air. Why is she making a scene? She's holding everyone up. Of course she's trying to scam her way into first class. The prejudice was a palpable force, thick and suffocating. Imani's mind, usually a fortress of clinical logic and surgical precision, was a whirlwind. Her first instinct was to fight fire with fire, to raise her voice to demand to see a manager, to assert the status she had worked so tirelessly to achieve. "I am Dr. Imani Vance. I am presenting at a global medical conference. I am not a con artist." But she knew with a weary certainty how that would be perceived. An angry black woman, hysterical, aggressive. It was a stereotype she refused to fulfill. So she waited. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and met the curious stares with a calm, unwavering gaze. She focused on her breathing, a technique she used to steady her hands before a complex operation. Inhale, exhale. She would not give Caroline the satisfaction of seeing her break. A man in his late 50s, his face florid and impatient, stepped out of the adjacent line. For God's sake, what is the hold-up? Some of us have connections to make. Caroline turned to him with a look of shared exasperation. I do apologize, sir. We're just dealing with a small security matter. It will be resolved shortly. Security matter. The phrase hung in the air, venomous and accusatory. It elevated the situation from a ticketing dispute to something far more sinister. Imani's heart hammered against her ribs. Now she wasn't just a potential fraud. She was a potential threat. Finally, a man in a crisp Global American Airlines suit approached with a brisk, purposeful stride. He was Mark Coulson, the gate supervisor. He looked harried, clearly pulled away from a more pressing issue. Caroline. What's the problem? He asked, his voice low and tight. We're already 10 minutes behind schedule. This woman. Caroline began gesturing toward Imani with a flick of her wrist. Is attempting to board with this. She pushed the heavy cardstock folder across the podium toward him. She claims it's an unlimited lifetime pass. I've never seen anything like it. It's obviously a fake. Mark picked up the folder. His brow furrowed in annoyance. He glanced at Imani, his expression a mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes held the same flicker of doubt she'd seen in Caroline's. For a moment, Imani's resolve wavered. What if he sided with his employee? What if they escorted her away, turning this humiliation into a full-blown nightmare? Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification, he said, his tone formal. Imani calmly handed him her passport. He opened it, looking at her photo, and then back at her face. He then examined the pass, turning it over in his hands. It was clear that he too was unfamiliar with it. It's an old one, Imani supplied, her voice betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. They haven't been issued in over 15 years, but I assure you it's in the system. Caroline smirked, crossing her arms. See, even she admits they don't make them anymore. It's a relic, probably found it on eBay. The insult was so juvenile, so petty, that it almost made Imani laugh. Instead, it strengthened her resolve. She met Mark's gaze directly. Sir, my name is Dr. Imani Vance. The pass is under that name. My seat is 2A. If you would please just scan the barcode, all of this can be cleared up. Mark hesitated, caught between his belligerent employee and the unruffled, articulate passenger. The optics of the situation were not good, and he knew it. A young black woman being publicly accused of fraud by a white employee was a corporate powder keg. With a sigh of resignation, he decided to follow protocol. All right. Let's just see what the system says. He muttered more to himself than to anyone else. He placed the pass under the handheld scanner. Caroline leaned in, a vulture anticipating a kill. Her face alight with smug certainty. She was ready for the loud, negative beep, the red error message that would vindicate her judgment. The scanner beeped once, a soft, melodic chime of confirmation. On Mark's computer screen, the passenger information for seat 2A instantly populated. But it wasn't just a standard booking. A large, gold-bordered box flashed at the top of the screen, a notification reserved for the highest priority passengers. Caroline craned her neck to see it. Mark stared at the screen, his jaw slackening. The color drained from his face. He looked from the screen to Imani, and back to the screen again. His professional mask had shattered, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Caroline, unable to see the details, grew impatient. What is it? Does it say?" "Fraudulent." Mark slowly turned to face her, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. He wasn't looking at a difficult passenger anymore. He was looking at a ghost from the airline's own hallowed history. "No, Caroline," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It's real. It's the Captain Robert Vance Memorial Pass." The name hung in the air, heavy and significant. Captain Robert Vance. For Caroline, the name meant nothing. It was just a jumble of words on a screen that had proven her wrong. Her face contorted in a brief flash of anger and confusion. How could this be? But for Mark Coulson, and for anyone with more than a decade of service at Global American Airlines, the name was legendary. It was whispered in training rooms, mentioned in company newsletters, and immortalized on a small, discreet plaque in the main pilot's lounge at the JFK hub. Captain Robert Vance wasn't just a pilot. He was a hero. Mark looked at Imani, his eyes filled with a new, profound understanding. He saw the resemblance now, the same steady eyes, the same quieter strength that stared out from the famed photograph on the wall. He felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't just inconvenienced a first-class passenger. He had disrespected the daughter of an icon. The Memorial Pass. Caroline stammered, the smugness finally dissolving into a puddle of uncertainty. "What is that?" Mark ignored her, his full attention on Imani. You're Captain Vance's daughter?" he asked, his voice filled with awe and mortification. "I am Imani," said simply the two words, landing with the weight of an entire legacy. A hush fell over the immediate area as the significance of the moment began to ripple outward. The story of Captain Vance was company folklore. 15 years ago, on a transatlantic flight from London to New York, his Boeing 777 had suffered a catastrophic engine failure over the icy North Atlantic. A fire had broken out, and the cabin had filled with smoke. Panic had ensued. But through it all, Captain Vance had remained a pillar of calm. With his co-pilot incapacitated, he had manually flown the crippled aircraft for over an hour, battling fierce crosswinds, all while calmly reassuring the 312 souls on board. He had successfully landed the plane at a remote airbase in Greenland with no power and only one functioning engine. Every single passenger and crew member survived. Robert Vance, however, had not. After ensuring everyone was safely evacuated, he had collapsed on the tarmac from smoke inhalation and severe stress-induced cardiac arrest. He had given his last breath to save his passengers. The airline, in a gesture of eternal gratitude, had done two things. First, they established a major aviation scholarship in his name. Second, they issued a single unique lifetime pass to his only child, his then 13-year-old daughter Imani. It was the Captain Robert Vance Memorial Pass, a document that granted her unlimited first-class travel anywhere the airline flew for the rest of her life. It was more than a ticket. It was a symbol of a debt that could never truly be repaid. It was locked into the airline's highest clearance level, flagged with an instruction that the holder was to be treated with the utmost respect and care. All of this context flooded Mark Coulson's mind in a matter of seconds. He looked at the pass in his hand, then at Caroline, whose face was now a pale mask of confusion and dawning dread. She had not only broken protocol, she had desecrated a sacred part of the company's history. Caroline Mark said, his voice dangerously low, "You need to board this passenger, immediately." He handed the pass back to Imani, his hand shaking slightly. "Dr. Vance," he said, his voice thick with apology. "I am so sorry. Please accept my deepest apologies for this unacceptable treatment. Your father he was the best of us." Imani simply nodded, accepting the pass. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a deep, bone-weary sadness. This pass was a constant reminder of what she had lost. Every time she used it, she felt the pride of her father's heroism mingle with the fresh pain of his absence. To have that legacy, that sacred memory, dragged through the mud and treated like a cheap scam, was a wound deeper than Caroline could ever understand. Caroline, now white as a sheet, fumbled with the scanner. Her hands were clumsy, her earlier efficiency gone. She avoided eye contact with Imani, staring blankly at her screen as she processed the boarding. The system chimed its approval again. "Enjoy your flight," she mumbled the words, tasting like ash in her mouth. Imani took a deep breath and walked through the gate, her head held high. As she walked down the jet bridge, she could hear Mark's voice behind her, sharp and furious, cutting through the air. "Caroline, my office. The second that door is closed, you and I are going to have a very serious conversation." The jet bridge felt like a tunnel, leading her away from the ugliness, but Imani knew it wasn't over. The wheels of consequence had been set in motion. As she stepped onto the aircraft and was greeted by the warm smiles of the cabin crew, she had no idea that the captain of this very flight was a man whose own life had been shaped by her father, and the reckoning was about to move to 35,000 feet. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 707 was an enclave of tranquility. Soft lighting, muted tones of cream and silver, and the gentle hum of the aircraft created a serene atmosphere. Imani found her seat 2A, a spacious pod with its own privacy screen and a lay-flat bed. She sank into the plush leather. The tension of the last 20 minutes, slowly beginning to seep from her muscles. She closed her eyes, trying to erase the image of Caroline's sneer and the curious stares of the crowd. A flight attendant approached, offering her a pre-departure glass of champagne. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Vance. My name is Elena. Please let me know if there's anything at all I can get for you." The attendant's smile was warm and genuine, a stark contrast to the hostility at the gate. The name on the manifest, flagged with its special status, had clearly preceded her. Just as Imani was taking a sip, a distinguished figure emerged from the cockpit. He was a man in his early 50s, with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair beneath his pilot's cap. He walked directly to her seat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a calm, reassuring baritone. "Are you Imani Vance, Imani's guard?" Went up instantly. Was this another interrogation? "I am," she replied, her tone cautious. The captain broke into a wide, heartfelt smile. He removed his cap, holding it respectfully in his hands. "I thought so. I saw the name on the manifest. I'm Captain David Miller. I flew with your father." The tension in Imani's shoulders dissolved, replaced by a wave of surprise and emotion. "You did?" "Yes, ma'am," Captain Miller said, his eyes glistening with memory. "I was his co-pilot for 2 years, right out of training. He was my mentor. Robert. He taught me everything I know about flying, not just the mechanics, but how to be a leader. how to be calm in a storm. He was the finest man I ever knew. Tears pricked at the corners of Imani's eyes. It had been years since she had spoken to someone who had known her father not just as a hero, but as a colleague, a mentor. He spoke of his co-pilots often. He loved to teach. He sure did. Miller chuckled softly. I owe my career to him. I was supposed to be on that final flight from London, but my wife went into labor with our first child. Robert insisted I stay. He had a junior pilot take my place. His voice cracked. He saved my life, and he gave me my family. I think about it every single day I put on this uniform. At that moment, Caroline Foster stepped into the first-class cabin to begin her pre-flight checks. She was carrying a stack of menus, her face a rigid mask of forced professionalism. She froze when she saw the captain of the aircraft speaking with Imani, not with the formality due a passenger, but with the familiarity and deep respect of an old friend. Captain Miller noticed her arrival. His warm expression hardened ever so slightly. He turned his body, subtly positioning himself between Caroline and Imani, a protective stance. Dr. Vance, he said, his voice loud enough for Caroline to hear clearly. I was just informed about the disgraceful incident at the gate. On behalf of the entire crew, and as someone who personally revered your father, I want to offer you my most profound apology. It never should have happened. The way you were treated is a stain on the honor of this airline and on the memory of Captain Vance. Every word was a hammer blow to Caroline. The other first-class passengers who had been settling in now looked up, their interest piqued. They had seen the commotion at the gate. Now they were hearing the verdict from the highest authority on the plane. Caroline stood motionless, her knuckles white as she gripped the menus. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. The pilot she had to answer to for the next 8 hours was personally indebted to the father of the woman she had just humiliated. Miller then turned his gaze directly to Caroline. His voice dropped, becoming quiet, controlled, and utterly chilling. Miss Foster. A word, please. He led her a few feet away into the galley. But his posture was ramrod straight, and his displeasure was a palpable energy in the quiet cabin. Imani couldn't hear their words, but she could see the exchange. Miller's expression was one of cold fury. Caroline's was one of crumbling defense, her face ashen as she nodded meekly, unable to meet his eyes. After a minute that felt like an hour, Miller returned to Imani's seat. Caroline scurried to the back of the cabin, her duties forgotten. Again, Dr. Vance. I am truly sorry, Miller said. Please rest assured this will be addressed at the highest levels. Your father's legacy demands it. For the duration of this flight, you are our guest of honor. If you need anything at all, you press this call button and I will come back here myself. He gave her a respectful nod, put his cap back on, and returned to the cockpit. The cabin door hissed shut. For the entire 8-hour flight to Geneva, Caroline Foster was a ghost. She performed her duties in the economy cabin, only never once setting foot in the front of the plane. Elena and the other first-class attendants treated Imani like royalty, their service imbued with a reverence that went beyond simple customer care. As the plane descended toward the Swiss Alps, Imani looked out the window at the snow-capped peaks. She had boarded the flight feeling small and angry, but now she felt a profound sense of connection to her father. His integrity, his character had echoed through time and space to protect her. The karma wasn't just about punishing Caroline. It was about the good her father had put into the world, coming back to shield his daughter. But even as she felt this sense of peace, she had a lingering feeling that the consequences for Caroline Foster had only just begun. The landing in Geneva was smooth, the Swiss efficiency of the ground crew a welcome contrast to the drama at JFK. As Imani deplaned, a woman in a sharp Global American Airlines corporate uniform was waiting for her at the end of the jet bridge, holding a sign with her name. Dr. Vance. The woman asked her expression a careful blend of concern and professionalism. "My name is Anya Schmidt. I'm the station manager for GAA here in Geneva." Captain Miller radioed ahead. "We were made aware of the incident in New York." Imani braced herself for another round of corporate apologies. "It's all right. The flight was very pleasant." "That's good to hear." "But it's not all right," Anja insisted. "What happened was unacceptable. We've arranged a private car to take you to your hotel, and our corporate office in Dallas has been trying to reach you. The Vice President of In-Flight Services, Mr. Harrison, would like to speak with you personally whenever you have a moment. He has left his private cell number for you." She handed Imani a business card. This was moving far faster and to a much higher level than Imani had anticipated. She thanked Anya, accepted the offer of the car, and was soon whisked away toward the city, leaving the airport behind. But the story hadn't been left behind. In the age of social media, nothing ever is. Unbeknownst to Imani or the airline, a passenger in the priority boarding line had witnessed the entire exchange at the gate. He was a tech blogger named Kevin Wu, a man with over 200,000 followers on Twitter who specialized in travel hacks and airline industry news. He hadn't just seen it, he had discreetly recorded most of it on his phone, from Caroline's theatrical eye roll to her loud accusatory call to the supervisor. While waiting to board, he had done a quick search for Captain Robert Vance and Global American Airlines. The search results provided all the context he needed. He saw the news articles from 15 years ago, the press releases praising the fallen hero, the web page for the memorial scholarship. By the time Flight 112 was over, the Atlantic, Kevin had crafted a detailed thread on Twitter. He started, "Currently on at Global American Flight 112, and I just witnessed the most appalling customer service I've ever seen." A gate agent at JFK Caroline Foster Terminal 8 publicly humiliated a young black woman traveling first class, accusing her of using a fake ticket. 112. He went on to describe the condescending tone, the security matter comment, and the eye roll. Then he delivered the bombshell. The ticket. It was the Captain Robert Vance Memorial Pass. Yes, that. Captain Vance. The hero who saved 312 souls in 2010. The passenger was his daughter, Dr. Imani Vance. The agent tried to refuse boarding to the daughter of the airline's greatest hero, 2-12. The thread exploded. It was retweeted by celebrities, journalists, and aviation enthusiasts. The video clip of Caroline's condescension went viral. The hashtags, Global American, Caroline. Foster and her Justice for Vance began trending in the United States. People were outraged. Veterans groups shared the story, incensed that a hero's legacy was being disrespected. Black travel groups shared it as a textbook example of flying while black. The constant suspicion and microaggressions faced by minority travelers, even in premium cabins. By the time Imani checked into her hotel in Geneva, the story was the #1 trending topic in North America. Her phone, which had been on airplane mode, lit up with a deluge of notifications. Texts from friends, missed calls from unknown numbers, and alerts from news outlets requesting a comment. Global American Airlines, caught completely off guard, was in full-blown crisis mode. Their social media channels were inundated with furious comments. Their stock price took a small but noticeable dip in after-hours trading. This was no longer an internal HR issue. It was a public relations catastrophe. Back in New York, Caroline Foster landed from her return flight to a living nightmare. As soon as she stepped off the plane, she was met not by Mark Coulson, but by two stern-faced representatives from corporate security and human resources. She was escorted to a sterile, windowless room in the airport's administrative building. They didn't mince words. "Caroline, we are placing you on immediate indefinite unpaid suspension," the HR executive said, sliding a letter across the table. "Suspension?" Caroline gasped. "For what?" "For following procedure. For questioning a suspicious document." "You're suspended for gross misconduct," Caroline, the executive, replied coldly, "for a catastrophic lapse in professional judgment, and for causing incalculable damage to this company's brand. Your actions were recorded. They are currently being viewed by millions of people online. The story is on CNN, Fox News, everywhere. You didn't just disrespect a passenger. You spat on the grave of a man this company considers a saint." The reality of the situation crashed down on Caroline with the force of a physical blow. Her smugness, her indignation, it all evaporated, replaced by a soul-sickening dread. 22 years of service. 22 years of perfect attendance, of sacrificing holidays and family events for this job. She had built her entire identity around being a senior purser for global American Airlines. And in the space of a 10-minute interaction, born of her own bitterness and prejudice, she had torched it all. She was handed her ID badge, now deactivated, and escorted from the premises. As she stood on the curb watching the airport, she had called her second home for 2 decades recede. She felt a terrifying sense of free fall. The karma she had so casually dispensed at the gate had boomeranged back with a velocity she could never have imagined, and it was just beginning to pick up speed. The weeks that followed were a slow, agonizing descent for Caroline Foster. Her indefinite suspension became a formal termination. The letter cited a breach of the company's code of conduct and ethics policy. Her 22 years of seniority, her flight benefits, her health insurance, her pension contributions, all gone. The viral video had made her infamous. Her face was everywhere. She was doxed online. Her address and phone number were leaked. She received a torrent of hateful emails and phone calls. She became a prisoner in her own small Queens apartment, the curtains drawn, the ringer on her phone silenced. She was no longer Caroline Foster, senior purser. She was Airline Karen, a meme, a cautionary tale of bigotry in the modern age. Job prospects were non-existent. No other airline would touch her. The service industry, where her skills might have transferred, was a minefield. One look at her face and a potential manager would recognize her from the news. Her savings, once healthy, began to dwindle at an alarming rate as she paid for Cobra to maintain her health insurance, the cost now astronomical without an employer's contribution. But the cruelest blow of fate had nothing to do with her career. Caroline's mother, Eleanor, had been her one constant, the person she called after every long haul, the reason she had stayed in New York. For the past year, Eleanor had been battling a mysterious neurological illness. It had started with tremors, then progressed to muscle weakness and difficulty with her balance. Local doctors were baffled, passing her from one specialist to another with no conclusive diagnosis. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly. With Caroline's high-quality airline insurance gone, the financial burden became crushing. The copays for specialists, the cost of MRIs, the expensive experimental medications. It was a tidal wave of debt. Caroline sold her car, then started selling her mother's jewelry family heirlooms that broke her heart to part with. Desperation gnawed at her. The bitterness she had once projected onto the world now turned inward, a cancer of regret and self-loathing. She would lie awake at night, the scene at the gate, replaying in her mind on an endless loop. The young woman's calm face, the roll of her own eyes, the smug satisfaction she had felt. How could she have been so stupid, so cruel? Her prejudice, a quiet poison she had nurtured for years, fed by petty grievances and a sense of being overlooked, had finally consumed her. After another fruitless visit to a local neurologist, Eleanor's doctor sat them down with a grave expression. "I'm sorry, Caroline," Dr. Peterson said gently. "We've exhausted our options here. Eleanor's condition is beyond our scope. The symptoms are presenting like an atypical aggressive form of motor neuron disease, but there are markers I've never seen. There is only one person I know who might be able to help." A flicker of hope ignited in Caroline's chest. "Who?" "Anyone. We'll go anywhere." Dr. Peterson sighed, knowing the difficulty of what he was about to suggest. "Her name is Dr. Imani Vance. She's at the New York Neurological Institute. She's not just a top neurologist. She's a leading researcher in exactly this field, atypical degenerative disorders. She just presented a paper in Geneva on a new diagnostic approach that could be relevant. But her wait list is over a year long. Getting an appointment is next to impossible." The name struck Caroline like a physical blow. Dr. Imani Vance. Geneva. It couldn't be. The world couldn't be that small, that cruel. She felt the air leave her lungs. It was the same woman. The woman from the airport. The woman whose life she had momentarily turned into a public spectacle. "Is there anyone else?" Caroline whispered, her voice hoarse. "In this specific niche field?" With her level of expertise. "No," Dr. Peterson said, shaking his head. "She is quite simply the best. She is your mother's only real shot." The irony was so thick, so suffocating, it was biblical. The woman she had judged as unworthy of a first-class seat now held the key to her mother's life. Karma hadn't just knocked on her door. It had kicked the door down, set up residence in her living room, and was now staring at her with cold, unblinking eyes. For days, Caroline was paralyzed by the choice. Her pride, what little she had left, screamed at her not to do it. The shame was too great. How could she possibly face Dr. Vance? How could she sit in a room with her and beg for her help after what she had done? But then she would look at her mother. She would see the fear in Eleanor's eyes as her hands trembled too much to hold a glass of water. She would hear the faint slur in her speech, a new and terrifying symptom. And in those moments, Caroline knew that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her mother's life was worth any humiliation, any groveling she would have to endure. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone. She didn't call the appointment line. She knew that was a dead end. Instead, she called Dr. Peterson back and begged him to make a personal appeal to send Eleanor's files directly to Dr. Vance's office with a cover letter explaining the urgency. 2 agonizing weeks passed. Caroline's hope dwindled with each passing day. Then one Tuesday morning, an email appeared in her inbox. The sender was the office of Dr. Imani Vance. The subject line read, "Regarding Eleanor Foster." Her heart pounding, She opened it. The message was brief and professional. It stated that Dr. Vance had reviewed the case file, noted the unusual progression of the disease, and agreed to see Eleanor. There was an opening due to a cancellation. The appointment was for the following Monday. Relief so powerful it made her dizzy washed over Caroline. But it was followed by a cold wave of terror. The appointment was in 6 days. In 6 days she would come face to face with her past, and she would have to place her mother's future in the hands of the woman she had wronged so terribly. The New York Neurological Institute was a cathedral of modern medicine, all glass, steel, and muted calming colors. But for Caroline Foster, it felt like a courthouse where she was both the accused and the plaintiff. The waiting room was a silent symphony of quiet anxieties. A young man sat across from her, his leg vibrating with an uncontrollable tremor. An elderly couple held hands, their knuckles white, their faces a shared mask of stoic worry. A mother tried to distract her listless child with a picture book, her voice a strained, cheerful whisper. In her previous life, Caroline would have categorized them with a glance, judged their clothes, their demeanor, their very right to exist in a space she occupied. Now she saw only herself, another soul adrift in the terrifying ocean of medical uncertainty, clinging to the fragile hope of a diagnosis. She sat beside her mother's wheelchair, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her fingernails dug into her palms. Eleanor frail and wrapped in a thick wool blanket, despite the room's warmth, seemed to have shrunk. Her fear was palpable, a cold aura that Caroline could feel beside her. Each time the door to the inner offices opened, Caroline's heart leapt into her throat, a frantic, caged bird. She had spent the last 6 days rehearsing an apology in her mind, crafting sentences of remorse, but they all felt like flimsy shields against the tidal wave of her shame. What could she possibly say? "I'm sorry, I'm a bitter, prejudiced woman who tried to humiliate you, but now I desperately need you to save my mother's life." The words were grotesque, impossible. A nurse with a kind face and gentle eyes finally called out, "Eleanor Foster." The name echoed in the quiet room. Caroline felt a dozen pairs of eyes on her as she stood and pushed her mother's wheelchair forward. The journey down the long, brightly lit corridor felt like the Green Mile. The walls were lined with abstract art splashes of color, meant to be soothing, but to Caroline they looked like chaotic synapses firing in a brain gone haywire. The examination room was sterile and intimidating. The nurse, whose name tag read Maria, took Eleanor's vitals with a practiced, compassionate touch that felt like a rebuke to Caroline's own years of curt, efficient customer service. "Dr. Vance runs a little behind sometimes," Maria said, with a warm smile at Eleanor. "It's because she gives every patient all the time they need. She'll be with you in just a moment." The door clicked shut, and the silence that descended was heavier than anything Caroline had ever known. It was punctuated only by the soft hum of a computer and the frantic thumping of her own heart. Her eyes were drawn to the wall opposite her, where a collection of framed documents chronicled a life of staggering achievement. A diploma from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine with highest honor, a certificate from a grueling surgical residency at Columbia, a fellowship in neurodegenerative disorders from the Mayo Clinic, an award for innovative research from the National Institutes of Health. Each frame was a testament to the brilliance, the dedication, and the sheer hard work of the woman Caroline had dismissed as a scammer trying to sneak into first class. The injustice of her own judgment was so profound, it made her physically nauseous. Then she heard footsteps in the hall, steady and purposeful. The doorknob turned. The door opened, and Dr. Imani Vance entered. She wore a pristine white coat, over a simple silk blouse and dark grey trousers. Her hair was pulled back in a neat professional bun, and in her hands she held a tablet displaying Eleanor's medical charts. She looked tired. Caroline thought the way all truly dedicated people look, tired. A weariness born not of boredom, but of profound engagement with the world. Imani's eyes met Caroline's for a single fleeting second. In that fractional moment, Caroline braced for the impact, a flash of anger, a flicker of contempt, a sign of recognition that would signal the coming storm. But there was nothing but a calm, professional neutrality that was in its own way far more devastating. It was the look a geologist might give a common stone, a thing to be noted and classified, before moving on to more important matters. Dr. Vance had already seen the name on the chart. She was prepared, and she had decided that Caroline Foster, the gate agent, was not worth a single joule of her emotional energy. She immediately turned her full attention and a sudden radiant warmth to the woman in the wheelchair. "Good morning, Eleanor. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I'm Dr. Vance," she said, her voice a perfect blend of compassion and authority. She didn't loom over the wheelchair. Instead, she knelt, bringing herself to eye level with her patient, a gesture of respect that made Eleanor visibly relax. "I've spent a lot of time with your file, but the charts never tell the whole story. I want to hear it from you. Tell me, how have you been feeling since your last visit with Dr. Peterson?" For the next 45 minutes, Caroline ceased to exist. She was a ghost in the room, a silent witness to a masterclass in medical care. Imani guided Eleanor through the most thorough neurological examination she had ever received. She tested reflexes with a small hammer, her movements precise and gentle. She asked Eleanor to track her finger, to push against her hands, to walk a few steps with assistance, observing every subtle hesitation and imbalance. But it was the listening that struck Caroline the most. Imani listened with an intensity that was absolute. She never interrupted. She would nod, her brow furrowed in concentration, and ask clarifying questions that were astonishingly insightful. "Eleanor, when you say your hands feel fuzzy, is it more like pins and needles, or like you're wearing a glove that's too thick? You mentioned the weakness is worse in the evening. Is that after physical activity, or does it happen even if you've been resting all day?" She treated Eleanor's subjective experience as a vital piece of the diagnostic puzzle. She treated her not as a disease, but as a person who was suffering. Caroline watched her heart, a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She remembered the countless passengers she had dealt with over 22 years, the ones with fears of flying, the ones who were ill, the ones who were grieving on their way to a funeral. How many had she dismissed with a curt phrase or a roll of her eyes? How much pain had she ignored because she was too wrapped up in her own petty grievances? Dr. Vance's compassion was not a performance. It was the very essence of who she was. And that inherent goodness made Caroline's own past actions seem monstrous in comparison. Finally, Imani completed the physical exam. She sat on a rolling stool, reviewed the notes on her tablet, and pulled up a complex-looking diagram of a cell. The silence stretched thick with anticipation. Well, Imani began her tone, shifting from inquisitive to declarative. "Dr. Peterson was right to be concerned, and he was right to send you here. Your symptoms are quite confounding and don't fit neatly into the classic presentation of ALS or Parkinson's." She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "However, they are not random. They form a clear pattern that aligns with a very rare, recently identified condition called Vexus syndrome. It's an inflammatory disease rooted in a somatic genetic mutation." She turned the tablet so Eleanor and Caroline could see. We used to think this primarily affected older men, but the latest research, some of it from our work here, shows that its presentation in women can be radically different, often masquerading as a primary neurological disorder. The inflammation it causes is what's attacking your nervous system and bone marrow. She looked directly at Eleanor, her expression serious but kind. The bad news is that it is a serious and progressive condition. Left untreated, it will continue to worsen. Eleanor's hand, trembling, found Caroline's, but Imani held up her own hand gently. "But there is very good news," she said, and her voice was a lifeline. "Because we know what it is, we know how to fight it. We have a new treatment protocol for this, a targeted therapy that can suppress the specific inflammatory pathway this mutation causes. It is not a cure, but we have had tremendous success. We can halt the progression. And in a significant number of patients, we have seen a remarkable reversal of nerve damage and a restoration of function. It will be a long road, Eleanor, but there is every reason to be optimistic." Hope, pure and dazzling, detonated in the small room. Eleanor let out a sob, a sound of such profound relief that it cracked Caroline's heart open. Tears streamed down Caroline's own face, hot and silent. They were tears of gratitude for this reprieve, for this chance, but also tears of deep, corrosive shame. Imani stood ready to call in the nurse and set the wheels of treatment in motion. For her, the puzzle was solved. The path forward was clear. Her work was done. But for Caroline, the reckoning had just begun. Dr. Vance. The name was a strangled whisper torn from her throat. Imani paused at the door, her back to them. She turned slowly, her face a mask of professional patience. I have to. Caroline stumbled to her feet, her legs unsteady. The words she had rehearsed were gone, incinerated by the raw emotion of the moment. Thank you is not. It's not enough. What I did. At the airport. There is no excuse. It was cruel. It was ugly. It came from a place inside of me that is just wrong. I judged you, and I was so wrong. I am sorry. I am so deeply, truly sorry. And for you to see my name on that chart, and to still help my mother. She broke down completely, her apology dissolving into ragged, gasping sobs. Dr. Imani Vance was silent for a long, heavy moment. She looked from the broken woman standing before her to the hopeful, tearful woman in the wheelchair. Her professional mask softened not into forgiveness, but into a profound, weary clarity. "Miss Foster," she said, her voice quiet but firm, resonating with an unshakable authority. "The person you were at that gate is not my concern today. My work, my entire life, is about dealing with things that are broken and trying to mend them. It constantly reminds me what is truly important and what is just noise. What you did came from your own brokenness, not mine." She took a step back into the room. "My father was a pilot. He flew through hurricanes and engine failures. He taught me that you don't get to choose the weather you fly into, but you always get to choose how you fly the plane. That day at JFK, you created a storm of ugliness and prejudice. You don't owe me an apology. You owe yourself a change in who you are." Her gaze was direct, unwavering. "Let me be very clear. In this building, I am a doctor. Your mother is my patient, and you are her daughter. That is the only relationship that matters here. My duty to her health, my oath, it supersedes everything else. I will give your mother the absolute best care I am capable of giving because that is who I choose to be." She gave one last reassuring nod to Eleanor. "Maria will be in to schedule your first infusion and your initial physical therapy evaluation. I will see you both in a month for a follow-up." And with that, she turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. Caroline sank back into her chair, the force of Dr. Vance's words leaving her breathless. It wasn't the absolution she thought she wanted. It was something harder and more meaningful. It was not forgiveness. It was grace. It was a clear, unyielding boundary that refused to let Caroline's past poison the present. Dr. Vance hadn't erased the sin, but she had refused to be defined by it, and in doing so had offered Eleanor a future. The final brutal lesson of karma was not one of punishment, but of responsibility. It had stripped Caroline of everything she valued, brought her to her knees, and forced her to see that the only path to redemption was to become a person worthy of the grace she had just been shown. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a flight attendant and a boarding pass. It's a story about the unseen baggage we all carry, the prejudices, the grief, the legacies we inherit, and the character we choose to forge. Caroline Foster's journey shows us that karma isn't always a thunderous lightning strike. Sometimes it's a quiet, sterile medical office where you're forced to confront the consequences of your own hatred and depend on the grace of someone you deeply wronged. Dr. Imani Vance, armed with her father's legacy of integrity, reminds us that the ultimate power lies not in retaliation, but in refusing to let the bitterness of others compromise who you are. This story is a mirror asking us all to look at our own snap judgments and the humanity of the people we pass by every day. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that explore the deepest corners of human nature.